Well, good morning. It's good to see everyone today. Have you noticed that people are just wound really tight lately? I'm not just talking like yesterday. I'm talking over the last few years. It just seems like people are more and more grr all the time. In fact, this week I was at a store I will never go to by myself because I have no need to go there. But I was at Hobby Lobby with my wife. And as we were at Hobby Lobby, I got in line and so on. Tara said, I'm going to go get something. And I was probably like third or fourth person in line. And all of a sudden, it was like, the internal voice in everybody's head said, crash in, like zoom, zoom, zoom. And before I knew it, I looked behind me, and there were like 10 people in line behind me. There was one line open. And it was interesting to watch people. It was interesting to watch the people as all of this was transpiring, to see the angst, to see the frustration, to see the anger, to see how people were fidgeting because they were going to have to wait 10 minutes to pay for whatever it is that they bought at Hobby Lobby. You see, the reality is people are on the edge. And I think people are more on the edge today than probably any of us could actually remember, but we are on the edge of anger. We are on the edge of anxiety. We are on the edge of being offended. We are on the edge of depression all the time, and it seems as though just a little nudge will send us over the edge. There's actually a popular blogger in the ministry world that he wrote a blog probably about a year ago, but I read this recently with the question, why is everybody so angry? And he actually gave some, what I think are very solid reasons why people are angry. One of them is, he said, we know everything instantaneously. See, if you go back 100 years ago, if there was an earthquake in some remote area of the world that's not in our circle, you might get to know if you're in a major city in a day or two with a grainy photograph that gives a little bit of the devastation and a little bit of the detail. If you're in a rural area, it might be days or even weeks before you get the information of what had happened. But today, if something happens across the street or across the world, we know instantaneously, and we have all of these images that are flooded to us, and we get all of the details, and we really don't have time to process the information. Now, couple that with the very, very fact that our computers are really smart. In fact, our phones are termed smart phones. And with the technology and the algorithms and different things like that today, we have kind of this experience when we get online, whether it be on social media, whether it be on a news site, whether it even be Google, that they know us pretty darn well. And so, for example, let's just say winter's coming up and I decide that I need a snowblower. I don't need a snowblower. I have 2 teenagers that live in my house. But let's say I was shopping for a snowblower and I got on Lowe's and shopped for a snowblower. It wouldn't be too very long until I get on Facebook and all of a sudden I'm getting all of these snowblower ads from different companies. And not only that, there might be even some that says, well, if this guy's going to go out and use a snowblower, he probably needs a coat. And so I'm going to get coat ads and glove ads and all of these different things. And then if you click on a particular article or a blog or whatever, they say, well, this might interest them. And so even if it makes you angry, your feed is flooded with stuff just for you. And whether we know it or not, every time we get online, there is a custom just for you feed that says you are the center of your world. And that, again, adds to a little bit of the anger. There's a term right now called sad fishing. You know what sad fishing is? If you are sad online and let people know that you are sad, other people will become sad for you. And you get that little dopamine drop because they say, hey, I'm sad too, and you get all the likes and the comments and different things, and we get reinforced that sadness works. And that can work with rage, and that can work with anger, and that can work with any number of things. And so there's that. There's also the very fact that we are constantly connected. Constantly. There's never a time where we're not getting a barrage of everything floating into our brains at any given minute. And with our phones, we're afraid that we're going to miss a text or a notification or whatever it is. My wife and I went to a movie the other day, and I will tell you the movie that we went to, I wasn't the only guy in the theater, but there were only a few of us. So I love my wife, and we went to see one of those chick flicks and different things, and I didn't cry, just going to lay that out there. But when I got out of the theater and I picked up my phone, I had like 12 or 14 just text notifications. And they're always coming to us. And add on top of that, we also have the notion that we are having this constant barrage of one crisis after another. In fact, I'm going to say our media does a really, really good job of manufacturing one crisis, and once that simmers down, they start another one, and once that simmers down, or they're not getting the traction, and it's just constant coming at us. And here's the result. We are more angry, we are more depressed, we are more anxious, and we are more offended than ever. And the end result is we live without peace. We live without peace. In fact, I'm going to go as far as to say this. As a people who are told that we have the peace that surpasses all understanding, we as Christians oftentimes throw gasoline on the fire of unpeace rather than living with peace. So I think Jesus has something to say. But what Jesus has to say, I think, is a little bit different than what we might expect. You see, in Matthew chapter 5, verse 9, Jesus says these words, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the sons of God." Blessed are the peacemakers. Now, when I read this, and in fact, as I have preached this in the past, I kind of read this and say, then my job as a follower of Jesus is to make sure that when people are in conflict, I bring peace to the situation. That's what it means to be a peacemaker. Now, that is, I think, part of the picture, but not all of the picture. So I think we have to come up with a definition of what it means to have peace, or what is peace. But if you were to ask 100 people on the street, what is peace to you, they would say that peace is the absence of conflict. And they would be partially right. But let's think about marriage here for a moment. In marriage, I think it's very easy to live without out-and-out conflict. I think it's really easy to, on the surface, get along. You're not throwing things at one another. You're not arguing. You're not fighting. But underneath the surface, there is angst. Underneath the surface is resentment. And so while there's not that major conflict, we have to say that there's also not peace. You could say that true of two nations. They're not throwing missiles at one another, and we would say that they're at peace, but yet there's tension and there's suspicion, and that's certainly not a place of peace. So I think to understand what peace is, we have to go back to really understanding that when Jesus spoke and said that we are to be peacemakers, he is coming from a completely different context than you and I. Jesus was Jewish, and as a Jewish man, I believe that he was probably speaking in Aramaic, Hebrew, and so on, and he would have used the word shalom. He would have used the word shalom, which is the Hebrew word for peace. And that is one of those things that it can be a greeting. In fact, oftentimes people will greet one another, shalom, and when they say goodbye, they will say shalom. I've got a friend that he's kind of tweaked it because he's a hipster pastor and so on like that. He'll say, peace out. I'm not cool enough to say peace out. But anyway, he will use that term, and we'll say, well, that's what peace is. And you go to Santa Fe, and you go driving down the street, you're going to see people with signs, and they are picketing for peace. And so what is peace? What was Jesus thinking when he would say that we are to be agents of shalom? Now, shalom actually comes from a word that means complete or whole. In other words, they would actually say that if there was a stone that was put into a building, and it was the final stone, that building would have completeness. It would have wholeness, that it would have shalom. Shalom really kind of points to this idea of kind of an inner calm. You might even use the word tranquility. You might even use the word well-being. And so life has a lot of moving parts. There's feelings, and there's emotions, and there's thoughts, and there's actions, and there's relationships, and so on. And when all of those come together, and they are as they should be, we would say that we have peace. And so basically, let me give you this definition. This is Brandon Shaffer 1:1, if you want to call it this. So peace is an unexplainable wholeness, completeness, inward calm, and well-being that is evident to everyone. When I say it's evident to everyone, you've been around that person that you just look at them, you can't explain it, but you're around them and you just say, they just have a sense of peace about them. And so to be a peacemaker means that we bring that wholeness, that completeness, that inner calm and well-being to our relationships, to our culture, to our world. In other words, we bring peace to every nook and cranny of our world. There's a problem with that. How in the world do we bring peace to the world when so many times we don't have it? How do we be peacemakers in a world where, let's just be honest, sometimes Christians are part of the problem and not the solution? In fact, one of the things we were doing this week, we were actually in the office, and we were talking about 2020. By the way, do you know that 2020 is an election year? And we're only a month and a half away from that bad boy. And in 2020, everybody on the face of the planet that lives within the borders of the United States of America is going to lose their ever-loving mind. That's just how it's going to work. And so one of the things, as we're thinking to 2020, there are going to be several messages and several message series that are really going to be aimed at how do we keep our mind? How do we keep our voice? How do we keep our faith in a world that is going completely berserk? It's going to happen. In fact, as we were talking about this the other day, we were talking about 2020, we were talking about this message and different things, and we were talking about peace. Jim brought something up. He said, the left is already framing it this way, and the right is already framing it this way, and they're both basically saying, if our candidate doesn't win, this is the end to the United States as we know it, which was said last election and the election before and the election before, and so on. But as I began to think about that, and I heard him say this, I got this knot in my stomach, thinking about what it's going to be like, and the hatred and the vitriol and the social media posts and different things like that are not going to be Christ-like. And it's not going to be non-Christians that are the ones that are just not being like Christ. It's going to be the church. And how we don't live as a people that has the peace that surpasses all understanding. I heard this 25 years ago, and I think it bears repeating. Tony Evans, he's a preacher in Dallas, Texas. He's got the dream job for me. He's the chaplain of the Dallas Cowboys. He said, God doesn't ride the backs of donkeys or elephants. And so we have to understand that God is bigger than all of this right here. But I'll be honest with you, I don't always have peace about this. In fact, as we finished our conversation and I had small group that night and went down to Walmart to get our stuff for small group, in the little drive from Valley View Christian Church to Walmart, I started cataloging all the areas in my life where I don't have peace. I would say that that's a mental exercise I would stay away from. I mean, seriously, because I started going through. I don't have, I always, we always, and some of you probably know a little bit about insight into our life, but we always have a stack of medical bills. And I was just kind of going through that, and it's like, well, that's not going to get done this week. And then there was the very fact that, I don't know if you know about pastors. Pastors have a lot of people say, hey, can I meet with you, and can you give me a call? And then there's all the other stuff on top of that. And I was looking at it on Tuesday thinking, there's no way I'm going to be able to accomplish all of this week. And I started thinking about all the stuff that I have to do around the house that needs to be done. And then I started thinking about Christmas. Christmas is like our time of year. My wife and I love Christmas. We got married in December, and we just love this time of year. But this is the first Christmas that my wife will not have all 4 kids in our house on Christmas morning. And so all of that came flooding in. And I realized I don't live with a peace that surpasses all understanding. Oh, it gets better. Then I started thinking, Shaffer, you got to preach on peace this week. And you ain't got it. And so then that led this unsettling in my heart. And I am the type of person that I never not sleep. It drives my wife nuts that I actually can put my head on the pillow and pretty much fall immediately to sleep. But when I started thinking about the fact that I didn't have peace, I didn't sleep that night. I got like 2 hours of sleep. In fact, if the sermon is incoherent today, it's because I wrote most of it after midnight. Because I just got up and said, I'm going to write my sermon. The reality is, I don't always live without peace, or with peace. And as I'm sharing this, I'm going to venture to say many of you are going, oh, I get it. It may not be the same thing. It could be your marriage. It could be your job. It could be the fact that sometimes we have kids that do not have brains, right? And all of that, we live with this unsettledness that is not the peace that surpasses all understanding. So the question is, how do we get peace? I've got a few answers. One of them is found in Colossians chapter 1. And in Colossians chapter 1, it tells us a little bit about Jesus, and this is what it says. It says, for in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, making peace by the blood of his cross. You see, the idea here is the brokenness, the brokenness, the lack of wholeness, the lack of completeness in our walk with Jesus or walk with God, the lack of inner calm, the lack of well-being that was the result of Adam and the very first sin has now been restored in Jesus. And it is only through Jesus that this is made possible. And I'm going to say something here today, and you probably heard me say this before, and I will say this probably until the day I die. I am not a fan of Christian bumper stickers on the backs of people's cars. I'm just not. In fact, we live in New Mexico. Do you know what New Mexico is? We are the capital of bumper stickers. Have you ever seen those people that is like smattered all throughout the back of their vehicles? No other place in the world do we have this other than New Mexico. Just going to share that. But I don't put any bumper sticker on the back of my car, and I certainly don't put any Christian bumper sticker on the back of my car, and here is why. Sometimes I'm a jerk when I drive. And I never want to be that guy that, cuts somebody off in traffic, and they say, see, there's one of those Christians right there. So, because I've done that before. And so I don't want to be that. But there is a bumper sticker that I have seen before, and I kind of get, and I'm going to go ahead and say there's some theology to it. No Jesus, no peace. No Jesus, no peace. In other words, without Jesus, there is no peace for you. But when you know Jesus and when you're journeying in life with him, there is peace. In fact, later in Colossians, if you just turn over to chapter 3, in chapter 3, verse 15, this is what it says. It says, and let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, to which indeed you were called in one body and be thankful. I want to talk about the idea of letting the peace of Christ rule. This word rule, it would be the action that was done by the umpire, by the referee in the Greco-Roman games. And so in the Colosseum and all the places, they would have an umpire. And the umpire had 100% absolute authority at all time in the arena. So whether it was right or wrong, his voice was the one who had absolute authority. And in this, we are told to let the peace of Christ rule in our hearts. In other words, Jesus has authority in your life. The political debate of today does not have authority in your life. The problem of today does not have authority in your life. The stresses, the anxiety, the depression, the sickness, the conflict with people, it does not have authority in your life. Jesus has authority. That's basically what this is saying here. An absolute authority. And not just absolute authority, we find in Philippians chapter 4. In Philippians chapter 4, we find a little bit more about peace. This is what it says: rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say, rejoice. Now, I don't have time to just dig into this, but the fact that we are told twice to rejoice is like it's redundant, but it's redundant for emphasis here. And it goes on to say, let your reasonableness be known to everyone. The Lord is at hand. Idea, I think this is a notion of peace, to live with reasonableness in our lives. But then it goes on to say, do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. I love this here. In fact, we're going to kind of dive deep a little bit into the language. The original language here, these are imperatives. There's two imperatives that happen in this passage. First is rejoice. And again, I say it, rejoice. These imperatives right here are important. They're telling us to come to a life of worship. Come to a life of Jesus focus. Come to a life where we sing his praises, but we also live his praises. And the other one here is, do not be anxious. So there's a positive command and a negative command. But here's the beautiful thing about these two commands. The idea here is, once you start, you don't stop. It's present active. So once you start, you don't stop doing this. So we continue to rejoice, but also we continue to not be anxious. Now with this is one of the beautiful things about peace. Peace is not the absence of conflict. Rather, it's the presence of well-being and inner calm and completeness in our lives. But here, the idea of do not be anxious, it's removing something from our lives, but we're replacing it and filling it with prayer, by supplication, by presenting our requests to God, by being thankful. This is the antidote for anxiety. And so we have this idea here that when life stinks, when life is full of stuff that just leaves us unsettled, we worship and we pray. And it's only through worship and it's only through prayer that this unexplainable peace will be known. In fact, that's what it says. And the peace that surpasses all understanding. All understanding. This is the peace that you can't explain. This is the peace that when people say, what is it that you have? Your words get fumbled other than just saying, Jesus. And that's the only explanation. But it says that this peace will guard your heart and will guard your mind in Christ Jesus. And so therefore, he's an essential component to this. But the idea of guard here, it's the action of a Roman guard who was standing at the city gate. And again, he had absolute authority on what came in and what went out. And so we need to allow Jesus And you want to talk about something really hard to do, let Jesus to be the absolute authority about what comes into our hearts and minds and the absolute authority about what goes out. But see, this is peace. But we're not called to just be peaceful people. We are called to be agents of peace in the world. We're to bring peace. We are to make peace in our world. And that's really difficult. But one of the things that we have to understand, we will bring peace when we have peace. In fact, I believe that what Jesus is getting at, as we grow in our walk and in our journey with Jesus, peace will overflow. And the reality is, and this is our bottom line, the overflow of my inner calm and well-being brings inner calm and well-being to people. And there's a term in leadership, I love this term, the non-anxious presence. What we are to be in the world is to be a non-anxious presence. That we bring tranquility and we bring peace and we bring calm and we bring wholeness to the world. And I'm just going to throw this out. When I threw this out the last couple services, somebody came up to me and said, "That was bold. A way to make everybody angry." I'm just going to throw this out. What if Christians, we were different this next election cycle? What if Christians, we were different and decided we're not going to get involved in the debate? And folks, I know that there's time and a place for healthy civil discourse, but rarely today is it healthy civil discourse. It's throwing insults back and forth. It's throwing hatred back and forth. What if we were different? What if we chose not to be involved? What if we chose to not enter into the insults back and forth, but rather we chose to speak peace and live peace into the situation? Now, I don't know, but I'm going to venture to say that when we choose to be different, people may ask the question, why are you different? And now we have a story to tell. And more importantly than a story to tell, we have a Jesus to talk about. So with that, there's a couple ways that we can own this as followers here today. One is this: make the world a better place. I do believe that once we have the well-being of Jesus living inside of us, we should seek the well-being of our world. In fact, we do that a lot as a church. And a week from tomorrow, we'll be having food pantry here. And we serve the materially poor in our area. And I think that's an important thing. And we have the tree set up for Christmas. And we're going to be doing gifts a little bit different this year than what we've done in the past. But we have the opportunity to buy individual gifts for individual people. And we can pray for them and their kids in the East Mountains. And we get to help them to really celebrate Christmas this year. And so while it's different, we're still seeking the well-being of the community. And we did Love Week this last year. And we're going to continue to do this. We have people in our church that they care about foster children. They want to do what is best for that community and that area of our population. There are people who care about the homeless. And they seek to bring peace to that situation. And so here's the reality. Part of being peacemakers is we make this world a better place until Jesus comes back. That's what we get to do. It becomes a little bit more bearable for people to live in sometimes the cesspool of the world that we live in. But we also get to connect people to Jesus. I said this earlier today that about 4:30 yesterday got really bad because my Kansas State Wildcats just totally blew it on the football field, and I was mad, and I went to Walmart. But earlier in the day, I took Seth down to get a haircut real quick, new barbershop here in town, and I needed a haircut, so I usually do it at home, but I thought, you know what, I'm going to go in and meet the new guy, new barber in town, and stuff like that. and found out that I was a pastor here. Told him I was a pastor here, and he remembers cutting Joel's hair, remembers cutting Tim's hair, and different things. And he said something that I just have to tell you. He said, "Your people are awesome." Actually, he said, "It seems like everybody that I cut their hair goes to church at Valley View." And he said something. He said, "No less than 15 or 20 times has somebody from your church invited me and my family to church." Bravo, Valley View. And I'm sure there are many people in this community who can tell that story. So let's keep it up, because people, we can make the world a better place, but if we don't connect them to Jesus, we don't really create peace. But before we bring peace to our world, we got to bring peace to ourselves. And I'm just going to throw it out like this: be still. Psalm 46:10. Be still and know that I am God. We love that verse, but do we realize that it was in the midst of catastrophe and calamity that God is speaking? He's saying, even though the earth give way and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea, life stinks. And when life stinks, withdraw. Spend time with me, be still with me, and I will show that I am God, and I will give you peace. Will you join me in prayer? Father God in heaven, I thank you for this day. I thank you for peace that only comes through Jesus. Thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.